Hello, everyone. Thank you again so much for joining us today for the Business After Windows live Q&A sessions. And again, remember that during these sessions, you can submit your questions on Twitter by tweeting at BizAfterWindows with the hashtag #TheNewCloud. Up next, we've got Shahin Pirooz, who is the CTO of RiverMeadow, and he spoke to us about automated cloud mobility. Shahin at RiverMeadow is a cloud services provider that specializes in cloud migration. And he's responsible for overseeing and expanding the development and integration of RiverMeadow's cloud migration SaaS platform. And we're very excited to have you today. Thank you so much, Shahin.
Thanks, Margaret. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's go ahead and dive right in. First question. Until the differentiation product is ready, how does data migrate without downtime and resync? Presumably data is added during the time it takes to move to another cloud system and can fall out of sync.
That's a great question. We have the ability to do a migration completely online. So when we do a migration, even without differential migrations, the server, the source server that we're migrating from, stays up and running, and there's no reboots or maintenance or anything you have to do. We simply connect to that server using the credentials you provide over a routable path and collect the data while that server is up and running and live, and leave no footprint behind on that server. So effectively, it's zero risk, because when you migrate the source, that server, the target server, is a replica of that server, the source server, at a point in time. When you want to do the final cutover, until differential migrations is available, you can deploy any mechanism for sync that you already use today, or you can simply do another migration as a cutover. And the easiest thing to do at that point, if you're using a migration, is take a maintenance window for the final cutover, quiesce the data on that server, do a migration, and cut over to the new target cloud, and you're up and running.
Great, thank you so much. So for a newer organization, what tips can you offer to the clouds that you support, about the clouds that you support, that would help the team choose which cloud to migrate to?
So also a good question. The key thing I would say that there's a lot of decisions and factors in selecting the target cloud that's right for you. We're not a cloud aggregator of any sort, so I would be doing injustice to cloud aggregators that focus in this space. But the key things I would point out are, when you're looking at a cloud, make sure that you're not compromising any of the controls, constraints, or policies that you have in place in your production environment just to consume cloud services. At the end of the day, security is your responsibility to make sure your company's secure, your IP is secure, and your data is secure. And in order to be able to manage that and control it in the cloud, make sure that you're evaluating that the clouds that you're selecting and going to can allow you to extend your security policy into that cloud, and not rather than compromising your security to consume those services. From that perspective, we're pretty agnostic, and the clouds that we support are the largest target clouds in the world, including Amazon, many OpenStack flavors, VMware's vCloud Air. We're just about to release Azure support, and as well as any internal private cloud. The answer may be that you're not going to go to a public cloud like the ones I mentioned, but you'll implement your own internal private cloud to which we can migrate as well.
So probably in consideration of the way that your company works, when people get to you, they already kind of know what's going on, right? You don't have to guide them so much from that very beginning process, or is that something that you find you have to do?
So it's a mix of things. Typically, you could think of us in two ways. One of them is a simple arrow in your quiver as part of the migration ecosystem. The other way is we have partnerships with the migration ecosystems. We view the world as really 5 phases in terms of migration. First, you have to discover what you have in your environment. So there's a discovery step that happens. We've got partnerships with risk networks for that. Then you have to prep and plan where you're going to. And this is where the cloud aggregators come in, where you determine the cost analysis for how much does it cost in this particular cloud versus that cloud. What systems am I going to move? Do I move everything or partial? If I'm moving a specific server, what dependencies are there with the other servers in my environment? Do I need to move more than that one in order to keep the application functioning? And then once you get past that prep and plan, you've pretty much decided what you're moving and created what we call move groups. And you can create those in the risk platform and then push that into Centerbeam. Push that into the RiverMeadow platform, which then pushes it into your target cloud. Those target clouds could be any of the ones I mentioned above. Post the migration, which is what RiverMeadow does, you have a testing phase, which is making sure the app worked, doing validation of your workloads, and then you have a cutover and ongoing sync that you need to do. And that ongoing sync is like I described, which is the cutover sync. It can be differential migrations when we release it, or it could be any data synchronization product that you use today.
Excellent, thank you. What's the largest number of servers that you've migrated at one time, and what's the smallest? And can you talk about the experiences a little bit?
Sure. We're relatively new to market. Our product went general availability in December of this past year. And the company's been around for 2 years doing developing of the platform. So we were not released to market, if you will, not general availability until December of this past year. And from December to now, we've migrated over 3,000 workloads. However, we have contracts today in place for some of the largest companies in the world, again, for thousands of workloads in multiple companies, and we also have one contract in front of us that is 100,000 migrations over the next 3 years. So in terms of the largest number of migrations in a given time, that varies from contract to contract. It really depends on if the size of the customer we're engaging with. We're looking at data center consolidations where they're looking at hundreds, even thousands of servers moving at once. We're also looking at service providers who use our platform that migrate individual customers into their platform, and that can be 3 to 5 servers versus the thousands I'm talking about. So from our perspective, whether you're moving one or thousands doesn't matter. Our platform scales to either end of that spectrum.
Thank you. How do you get around the security concern with BYOD, bring your own device, and BYOA, bring your own app?
Good question. So from what we're doing today is we're really exposing the capability, the facility for you to take your applications and move them into a cloud SaaSable model. So by taking your application infrastructure, let's say you have a 3-tier application, which is a web front end, a mid-tier, and a database back end. We allow you to move that infrastructure to a cloud, which then makes it easier for you to maintain from an infrastructure perspective and then expose those services to your endpoint consumers, whether they're mobile or physical desktops. So that's the problem we solve. In terms of BYOD, we don't solve that problem directly. We're really solving the capability of the mobility of the applications to the cloud. The security that you would implement for BYOD, including endpoint management solutions or doing configuration management on those endpoints, implementing security policies and all that. There's plenty of companies out there that can address those problems, and others that are in this conference that you can look to answer the BYOD problem. The bring your own app answer is less about the endpoint for us than it is the back-end infrastructure and movement of that application to the cloud.
It's good to not have your finger in too many dishes and make sure that you're the expert on the thing that it is that you do, and I appreciate that.
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay, so how are company HR managers combating employee mindshare with the rapid onset of BYOD? I don't think that that's for you, so let's skip that. Great presentation. Question: what is the preferred method to SaaSify company applications? There are so many options: build your own, license, where to host, etc.
Yep. So if you were starting from scratch, if you had a new company and you were building your company, then I would consider building your own in a cloud environment, and I would take advantage of clouds like Amazon that have an application ecosystem that allows you to build without having to have expertise in the database layer, in the application layer, and in the different tiers that make up your environment. On the other hand, many of us have already got infrastructure that we manage and support today, and I differentiate those, the first one being greenfield, and the second one being brownfield, which is existing platforms that we have to continue to support. It's a difficult challenge to take an existing brownfield environment and convert it into an Amazon-ready or a Clicker-ready or any other SDK-based application ecosystems that's SaaSified. What we enable is taking your existing brownfield workloads and moving them to a cloud platform, and really the next step beyond that is how do I take and front-end that? And there's multiple mechanisms to that. You can implement a thin client layer in front of your application and then expose that thin client layer to your endpoints. So you can implement Microsoft's thin client technology using Windows 2008 R2, or you can implement Citrix, for example, into that. And if you're in a VMware cloud, you can implement VMware to front-end that platform. So really the key thing is you've got, in a three-tier application, you've got your back-end, your mid-tier, and your front-tier. And then you've got that fourth tier, which most people don't think about. You've got the client tier, which is the software that runs on the client. When we're talking about mobile devices, the service provider, or rather the ISV, the application that you're using, may not have created a mobile client. And in that case, that's where the thin client technologies come into play and basically create an interface that you can install on your mobile devices that accesses the same type of application that your desktops do. If you consume that type of model, you're now extending your capability not just to mobile devices, but you could consume those thin client apps on desktop environments as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Using RiverMeadow to move to a SaaS model, what is the typical cost savings by percentage?
So comparing with our standard answer to that question is comparing it against a migration of manual effort. So you're taking and doing a P2V of your servers, you're putting them onto some disks, shipping them to the target cloud environment, importing that, instantiating it, get it up and running, and then doing the cutover and the synchronization. We are typically 10 times faster and 5 times cheaper than the manual effort. And that comes from a lot of data we've collected from systems integrators that do migrations day in, day out to multiple target clouds. So short answer is that 10x and 5x number that I just gave you is really focused on how much faster and cheaper we are than manual. There are other automation technologies in the environment that do data replication, but they're not as efficient as RiverMeadow because you have to implement templates, as I described in the presentation, install software on the templates in the source, do the synchronization, figure out how to do cutover, and then also manage all the DNS and application testing. And they're very highly prone to failure because of the mashup of the operating systems. So the short answer to the question is that we are cheaper and faster than manual. We are cheaper and faster than many of the automation technologies out there today. We're the only technology that really takes and moves the compute along with the data. Most of them are really data movers.
Great, thank you. This is an interesting question. I saw this earlier. The RiverMeadow migration method looks overly simplistic. Is it really this easy? Is huge?
So we've spent an awful lot of time trying to figure out how to make a very complex DevOps problem, which is all of the moving parts that require doing a P to V, a V to V, or a C to V, and then taking that and converting it for the target cloud. If you think about the mechanics that make up a movement of a server, the very first thing you have to do is capture the source. So converting from physical to a virtual, or one virtual to another, or a cloud to another, and then taking that virtual image that we create and injecting into it all of the drivers, configuration, and tools required to run in the target environment. You may be coming from Amazon and going to OpenStack or going to VMware, or vice versa. And there are no tools in the market today that do a cross-platform hypervisor conversion. And there are many tools you can use to do all of the steps that we do, but it requires an awful lot of expertise in each of the areas, and then all the manipulation of the images in between. So there's transition steps that you have to take, and then the installation of drivers and software. What we do is we automate all that around an orchestration platform. We have an orchestration layer that sits on top of our software, and that orchestration layer is really where the IP of our platform comes in. We make a very complex problem, so it's not easy, it's very complex, and we make it easy by simply asking you for 4 pieces of info. We ask you for the IP address of the source, the credentials of the source, the network routable path between the source and the target cloud, and the credentials of the target cloud. And once you enter that data, you push the migration big easy button, and off you go. You're migrating the server from one place to the other. All of those mechanics I described earlier are happening for you behind the scenes and under the covers. But we really hide that from the end user so that you don't have to worry about how all that happens. You get a fully functional, bootable system in the target cloud that is an exact duplicate of the source, but configured to run in the target cloud.
So you spoke about requiring a certain level of expertise to use some other similar products to yours. Have you experienced a lot of pushback from some of those people that maybe do have the expertise and are kind of like, hey, or are they maybe embracing what you're offering and excited about it?
That's a great question. As with many new technologies, the first reaction is, I already know how to do this, and why would I need your technology? And I got to tell you that for the last 13 years, I was the CTO of a service provider, so I was a consumer of services like this. And what I did was onboard customers into my cloud, and so I had to build a lot of automation to get this done. And when I was first introduced to RiverMeadow, the question I asked was exactly that question. I've already solved this problem. Why do I need you? And after spending probably about 3 to 6 weeks evaluating the product and looking at it, I came to the conclusion that had I had the time, money, and wherewithal to build automation the right way, I would have done it the same way RiverMeadow did. And 6 weeks after that, I was a CTO of RiverMeadow. So coming from a customer, I tried the Hair Club for Men and I fell in love, so now I joined it. And the answer I would give to anybody who views this as, I don't get why I would have to do this, I do it today, is give it a shot. It really simplifies a lot of the manual, heavy lifting processes that you have to deal with today, and lets you focus on the more important things surrounding the movement of a server, which are understanding the source environment, planning and prepping and architecting what needs to move, when it needs to move, and then the ongoing testing after the fact to do the cutover. The problem we solved is the lift and shift from one environment to the other, but we don't solve the full migration ecosystem today.
Great. And we've got one last question here. How does data syncing work on live systems using RiverMeadow? It seems like some data loss is unavoidable.
Great question. We answered a similar question earlier, which is that in order to do a final cutover, after you do a migration, that gives you a completely risk-free way to do testing and evaluation of your server on the target cloud without impact to your source server. So your production environment can be up and running and continuing to process transactions, whereas you can test and evaluate the target cloud server, even potentially upgrade it to a new version if you wanted to, out of band from the source. The synchronization then can happen in multiple ways. Let's assume there's no upgrade that you do. You're just migrating and testing and validating that it works in this cloud platform. The cutover synchronization is the only time you need to do a maintenance or a change control, where you would schedule downtime for your application, you would quiesce your databases and make sure you're in a steady state, do one more synchronization or cutover to the production cloud, repoint your DNS servers, and you're up and running. The value that we bring to the table is, in contrast to all the other players in this space, which are data movers, which all they do is synchronize data, is you have to have 2 maintenance windows for them. The first one to install their software and configure it to synchronize, and the second one to do the final cutover. For us, you only need to have that second maintenance. There's no 2 maintenances for us. So really, your production environment can keep running while you're doing a migration. You test that migration in the target cloud. When you're ready to cut over, then you do a maintenance window, quiesce your database, and cut over. And that is without doing that maintenance window and shutting down and quiescing the database, you have the same problem that anybody else would. There would be a small amount of data loss. The quiescing and shutting down of the application is the only way to avoid data loss, and having a maintenance window that you let your customers know about. Outside of that, there is no such thing as a live migration across clouds. Anybody who promises you that would be lying to you.
Mm-hmm. What sorts of organizations or companies would promise something like that? Is that something you experience a lot?
No, there's nobody that does. It's the reality is we're not seeing anybody that promises a live migration. The closest to a live migration is something that we're doing, which means that the system stays live. If you think about, for example, VMware and their live vMotion technology, that works great within a single network, within a LAN environment. But when you're talking about going from one data center to the other, vMotion is not a live migration platform either. And that is going from the same technology to the same technology. So 2 ESX servers in the same data center, moving the server from one to the other. When we're talking about going from Amazon to OpenStack, or OpenStack to VMware, or VMware to Azure, there's nothing that solves this problem in the way that we do it. We're the closest thing to a live migration that you'll get.
Great. And is there anything else that you'd like to say or touch on before we finish?
No, most of it was really covered in the presentation, which is if you're really looking at how to enable your mobile users, the BYOD users, to gain access to the applications they're using today, that's a difficult proposition to poke holes in your firewall and expose your applications to the internet, and there's risk associated with, do you have the proper set of controls and security in place in your own data centers today or in your own premises? And the cloud is bringing promise of allowing commodity-based firewalls, routers, switches, and things that you could implement security layers in front of, as well as the quick ability to implement thin clients in front of those apps, and then allow your mobile devices to consume those services. And so the key thing, the first step in this process is understand that BYOD is happening. You're getting more mobile devices, which says that those users now expect to use their applications on those mobile devices. And now you have to solve the problem of how do you expose those apps to these mobile clients. RiverMeadow gives you the ability to move the servers into a cloud platform and then create a front end for those mobile devices.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shahin, for joining us today.
Thanks, Margaret. It's been fun.
And thank you to everybody for joining us as well. To catch the next session, please return to businessafterwindows.com, scroll down to the Q&A session schedule, and then click the live Q&A button. Thanks again.